Hello, people of grace. In our weekly Pastoral Connects, we've been looking at Jesus' letters to the seven churches in the book of Revelation, but especially the overcomer statements and the promises that Jesus makes as he tries to really coach his followers up from where they are, and some of them were in a pretty good place, and some of them were not, to really the destiny and the plan that he had for them as they would progress in their spiritual journey. And he summarizes that with these different overcomer statements. And we take a step back from that, as I've been mentioning in our Sunday morning sermons at Grace Bible Church. You can look at Jesus' letters to the seven churches as examples of mentoring and spiritual formation, which is often painful for the one being formed because of things that need to be corrected and like a broken bone being reset, or a physical therapy process to recover from a traumatic injury or a stroke. These are challenges for us. But one of the best examples of spiritual formation in our Bible really is the Apostle Peter. And you see that softening in his life and him becoming more and more like Christ, and just the change in his tone when you read his letters and you see the Peter in his letters compared to the Peter we see in the Gospels. I don't think there was any real increase in Peter's sincerity. I think he was very sincere from day one and very passionate and in his own way very committed. But he lacked self-awareness, he lacked humility, he lacked graciousness. And that's what you really see in 2 Peter, is someone who's humble and gracious and has really gone to great depths in his own spiritual formation. And we see that really just from looking at two passages from 2 Peter. That's all I have time for today. The first one is from 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5, where Peter is talking about, in that context, how we have this incredible knowledge of God and how that saves us from the things that corrupt our soul. But the bottom line response to that faith and having that faith and that relationship with Christ, the way that it should first show up in our life is that we take a high level of initiative to become more spiritually formed people, more virtuous people, people that just have a closer walk with Jesus. In 2 Peter 1:5, Peter says that based on all these promises that God has given us, we should be making every effort. We should be diligent. We should be initiating. We should be eager. We should have a good work ethic about our own spiritual journey. And Peter says to make every effort to add to our faith virtue, and virtue becomes the foundation for true knowledge or experiential awareness of God, which brings self-control. As we grow in self-control, we become more steadfast and more steady, which allows us to stay more godly or more God-centered. And as we become more God-centered, we are going to love people, brotherly affection, and really just walk in the same kind of agape love, that unconditional love that really characterizes God himself. It's a journey of spiritual formation, and that inner growth is actually what gives us assurance of salvation. And when it's not happening, regardless of our theological systems about eternal security, perseverance of the saints, whether you can lose your salvation or not, you're going to get in an unhealthy place and a doubting place. So spiritual formation is an internal work that gives great assurance and confidence as we increasingly walk in love. As Peter winds down his book and he talks about false teachers and frustration over time passing before the Lord returns and people falling away and becoming scoffers and all these negative things, but he lands his book on a very simple promise: just keep growing in the grace and the knowledge of God. So we start our journey with this faith and this knowledge of God. If that's real in us, if that's something that is really spiritually formed in us, we become high initiators. We make every effort to just become more virtuous, loving people, more like Christ. And as we go through our ups and downs in life and the challenges of the faith journey, we just have to come back to this very settled place of, I'm just going to keep growing in the grace and the knowledge of God. I know that I'm someone who can be pretty hard on myself if I feel like I didn't really make the right decision or stumbled in some way or wasted part of my life. And eternal life cannot be wasted. So really, it's just about learning. And we learn sometimes in positive ways, but I think we often learn more emphatically and deeply through negative experiences. So I would close today with something I really first heard Dr. Rick Rhodes um, kind of explain very simply and powerfully. And it's really Peter's own restoration when he fell away from Christ, when he had denied Christ. And we see Peter become a witness of the resurrected Christ. But then that's down in Judea and Jerusalem. The next thing you know, he's up in Galilee. And that's where he gets restored by Jesus at the end of the Gospel of John. But what Rick Rhodes pointed out, and I'd never really thought about it before he said it, was how about that 90-mile walk from Jerusalem to Galilee? How about that walk? I imagine that as Peter wandered up to Galilee, he had a lot of time to think and to process with God. And that's a powerful moment where God can teach us. We cannot just be me and God, we've got this. We're not made that way. We're meant to have fellowship. I like to use Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as an example of an appropriate process of connecting with God in dark times, where Jesus had his 11 that he took into the garden. He had his 3, Peter, James, and John, that he took further in that were closer to him. But then there was that part of the journey that wasn't devoid of community, but was something that Jesus did have to wrestle out on his own, like Jacob wrestling with an angel, or I think like at least parts of Peter's 90-mile walk were probably just him deeply processing with God. So take initiative to do that. Don't shrink back from what you think are your defeats or discouraging times. Allow God to use that to form you. Because ultimately we're saved by grace, not by how well we perform. And we're just squandering the opportunity to learn if we get overly discouraged by what we see as our failures or our mistakes. Some of our greatest growth comes from those things as we become spiritually formed. And as we see Christ working through those things in our lives, we become encouraged and assured. And assurance is encouraging. Have a blessed day.